You know how it is, you want to get the real story on something important, but without wading through tons of dense documents or, confusing jargon.
Exactly. It can be overwhelming.
Well, that's our goal today on the deep dive. We're going to try and cut through some of that noise. We're focusing on a pretty specific development, something related to how the federal government tracks disaster relief money.
That's right. We're diving into House Bill 153. It's got a formal name, the Post-Disaster Assistance Online Accountability Act.
Okay, H.R.153. And this has moved forward a bit?
It has. Passed the House already, and now it's landed in the Senate, specifically with the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. And it's potentially significant because it could really change how the public can follow where disaster recovery funds are going.
Okay, so lay it out for us. What's the main idea, the core purpose of H.R. 153?
Well, fundamentally, the bill is about creating one central place online, a public website, where information on all federal disaster aid gets reported.
One place, instead of scattered everywhere.
Precisely. Imagine not having to hunt through, 10, 20 different agency websites or reports to piece things together. The idea is to centralize it, make it accessible.
That really does sound like a big shift, a clearer picture, hopefully. So for our deep dive today, we're using the actual bill text, right? Going straight to the source.
Yep. The bill itself.
Okay, let's get into the mechanics then. How would this online hub, this repository, actually be set up? Who's in charge?
The bill points to the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. They're tasked with establishing it.
OMB.
But not alone. They have to do it in consultation with the Secretary of the Treasury and the heads of the relevant federal agencies involved in disaster aid.
So definitely a coordinated effort.
Sure.
And this website or repository is a brand new thing, a whole new URL we need to remember?
Actually, no. And that's kind of interesting. The bill specifies it needs to be a subimage on an existing government website.
Oh.
The one set up by the Federal Funding, Accountability, and Transparency Act of 2006. You might know it as usaspending.gov. Or at least the principles behind it.
Ah, okay. So they're leveraging existing infrastructure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Not reinventing the wheel.
Exactly. It connects this new disaster reporting directly to broader federal spending transparency efforts that are already underway.
Right. So the platform exists, or at least the main site does. Who actually puts the information in? Who feeds the beast, so to speak?
That falls to what the bill calls covered federal agencies.
Covered federal agencies, okay.
Any agency fitting that description. If they provide disaster assistance in a given quarter, they have to submit the required information.
And how often?
Quarterly, every 3 months. And they have to get that data in within 30 days after the quarter closes.
30 days. Okay, that seems reasonably prompt for government reporting. You mentioned coordination earlier with OMB setting it up. Does that coordination continue with the reporting itself?
Yes, it does. The bill states these submissions must be coordinated with the OMB director.
And why is that important? What does that coordination achieve?
It's really about consistency, making sure Agency A isn't reporting apples while Agency B reports oranges. It ensures the data is hopefully comparable and standardized across the board, makes it much more useful.
Right, so you can actually compare spending patterns or project types across different agencies responding to the same disaster.
Exactly. And there's another key detail here. The data has to be submitted in a format that is machine readable.
Machine readable. Okay, that sounds technical, but I suspect it's important. What does that mean in practical terms for, say, a citizen or a journalist trying to use this site?
It's actually a huge deal for usability and, well, real transparency. It means the data won't just be like a PDF image of a report that you can only read.
Okay.
It means the data will be structured, think spreadsheets, databases, formats that computers can easily ingest, sort, filter, and analyze.
Ah, so you could actually download the data and analyze trends or map funding or compare different disasters much more easily?
Precisely. It unlocks the potential for much deeper analysis by researchers, watchdog groups, journalists, anyone really, in a way that just isn't practical if the data is locked up in static documents.
That's a really good point. It's not just about seeing the data, but being able to work with it. Okay, so we know who reports, how often, and in what format. What specific information are these agencies required to submit? This is the nitty-gritty, right?
It is. The bill lists 7 specific pieces of information for each instance of disaster assistance provided by a covered agency.
7 things. Okay, what are they?
First, the total amount of disaster assistance the agency provided during that quarter, just the top line number.
Got it. Total outlay.
Second, the amount of that total that was actually expended, meaning spent or obligated, which means legally committed to specific projects or activities.
Okay, so not just allocated, but actually put to work or earmarked. What's next?
Third, and this is a big one, a detailed list of those specific projects or activities funded. And for each one, they need to provide several details, like the name of the project or activity, a description of what it is, an evaluation of its completion status.
Yeah.
Is it not started, underway, completed?
Ah, so you can track progress, not just
Right.
spending.
Exactly. Also needed is the award identification number, a unique tracker for that specific funding.
Okay.
And importantly, the catalog for disaster assistance number. That's a FEMA identifier that links the funding back to the specific disaster program.
Right, helps categorize the type of aid. What else with the project list?
Location information, including ZIP codes. That's crucial for geographic analysis, seeing where the money is actually going on the ground.
Definitely. Allows for mapping and checking for equity, potentially.
Could do. And finally, number 7 on the overall list, agencies also have to include any other reporting requirements they are already collecting for that specific assistance. So leveraging existing data collection too.
Wow, okay. That's quite a list. Total amount spent obligated, and then for each project, name, description, status, ID number, FEMA number, location, and other reporting. Seems pretty comprehensive.
It aims to be, yes, giving a multifaceted view of each piece of assistance.
Now, the bill also mentions guidance and agreements. What's that about? Setting the rules of the road?
Pretty much, it recognizes that getting all these agencies on the same page requires clear instructions. So it says the covered agencies, again working with OMB and Treasury, will issue guidance needed to implement the act effectively.
Makes sense. Standard operating procedures, basically.
Essentially. And there's another interesting provision about agreements. It allows the OMB director the option to partner with a private entity.
A private company, or...
That could be. The bill mentions a private entity, including nonprofits specifically, to actually develop and maybe even maintain this online subage.
Why would they do that?
The rationale given in the bill is if the director determines it's necessary to enhance transparency and usability. So perhaps bringing in specialized tech expertise for the website build, data visualization, making it really user-friendly for the public.
Huh. That's an interesting flexibility built in, leveraging outside help if needed to make it work well. Okay, let's circle back to definitions. You mentioned covered federal agencies. Who exactly does that include? Seems vital to know who's on the hook for reporting.
Absolutely. The definition is quite specific. It explicitly includes any agency providing assistance under the Stafford Act.
Which is the main federal disaster law, right?
Correct. That covers FEMA and potentially parts of many other agencies depending on the disaster. But the bill also specifically singles out 2 agencies by name: the Small Business Administration, the SBA,
Makes sense, they handle disaster loans.
and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD.
Also key, especially for longer-term recovery and housing. So Stafford Act agencies plus SBA and HUD are definitely covered.
Yes, those are the core reporters defined in this bill.
Got it. Now, what about disaster assistance itself? How broadly is that defined? What kind of funding triggers this reporting?
It's defined pretty broadly. It's basically funds the federal government provides in response to a specified natural disaster. Okay. And it lists examples: SBA disaster loans under their specific authority, HUD community development block, grants for disaster recovery. That's funding for relief, long-term recovery, infrastructure, housing, economic revitalization.
So a lot of the big HUD recovery programs.
Yes, tied to major disasters.
Yeah.
Also included is coverage under HUD's National Flood Insurance Program. And of course, any assistance provided directly under the Stafford Act itself. It's meant to capture the main channels of federal aid.
It sounds like it covers the immediate response and the long-haul recovery funding. What about who receives the aid? Who are the eligible recipients that this reporting tracks funding to?
Okay, this is another key definition. An eligible recipient is any entity getting disaster aid directly from the federal government. So through grants, loans, contracts.
It's like state governments, local towns.
Exactly. States, local governments, tribal nations, potentially nonprofits if they get direct federal grants or contracts. The bill explicitly mentions states are included.
But what about individuals? If I get an SBA loan for my home?
Good question. The definition specifically excludes individuals as eligible recipients for the purpose of this reporting requirement. The focus here seems to be on tracking the flow of funds to organizational or governmental entities managing recovery efforts.
Okay, so it's tracking the grants and loans to states, cities, organizations, etc., but not down to the individual homeowner level in this specific database. Understood. And lastly, the trigger event. Specified natural disaster, what qualifies?
Again, quite broad. It includes major disasters declared by the president under the Stafford Act, which is the most common type we hear about.
Right.
Also, emergencies declared by the president under the Stafford Act. It specifically mentions large fires on public or private forest or grassland, and then it has a catch-all. Basically, any other natural catastrophe for which the federal government makes some kind of disaster declaration.
So hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, wildfires, tornadoes, pretty much anything that triggers a formal federal disaster response.
That seems to be the intent, yes, to cover the gamut of natural events requiring significant federal aid.
Okay, this is really helpful for understanding the scope. So just to recap the bill's journey so far. H.R.153 passed the House when?
Passed the House on January 14th, 2025.
And then went straight over to the Senate.
Yep. Received in the Senate the very next day, January 15th. It was read twice, as is standard procedure, and then formally referred to the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs.
So that's where it sits now, in committee in the Senate.
Correct. That's its current legislative status.
Yeah.
It's waiting for committee action hearings, maybe amendments, a vote to move it to the full Senate floor, potentially, or it could stall there.
We'll have to see. But it represents, as you said, a potentially pretty big step towards opening up this whole area of government spending.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
A significant move for transparency if it becomes law.
Okay, let's pull back a bit then and think about the listener. Why does this bill, this Post-Disaster Assistance Online Accountability Act, ultimately matter? What's the so what here?
Well, I think connecting it back, the big picture is empowerment through information. If this works as intended, it could give citizens, communities, journalists, everyone, a much clearer, easier way to see how taxpayer dollars are being used after disasters strike.
So moving away from digging through scattered reports.
Exactly. From scattered, sometimes hard to find or hard to compare data, towards a single, hopefully standardized and navigable online source. That's the potential promise.
And what are the downstream effects? What could having this kind of easy access transparency actually lead to?
Well, the hope is always that transparency fosters accountability, right? When it's easier for people to see where the money's going and critically see the details, the projects, the locations, the status, it equips them to ask better questions, to monitor how effectively and frankly, how equitably these vital recovery funds are being used.
So better oversight, potentially.
Potentially, yes. Increased public scrutiny might encourage agencies and recipients to manage funds more efficiently, maybe more responsibly. It could highlight bottlenecks or successes in the recovery process. Ultimately, the goal would be better outcomes for the communities trying to rebuild, maybe even build more trust in the process over time.
So definitely a bill with significant implications if it progresses through the Senate and becomes law. Something worth keeping an eye on.
Absolutely.
Which leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about this potential shift, how do you think this level of increased transparency in disaster funding might actually impact recovery efforts on the ground?
Yeah, that's the real question, isn't it? Would easier access to data genuinely lead to, say, faster rebuilding or maybe more equitable distribution of aid? Would it build more trust between communities and government agencies during incredibly difficult times?
Or could it raise new challenges? What specific questions does this idea, having detailed, machine-readable data about disaster spending readily available, bring up for you about recovery in your own area, or maybe nationally?
Something to chew on. A potentially powerful tool, but how it gets used. And what questions we ask of the data. That's really where the impact lies. Something to think about.